We are running a little bit behind getting online because well, it's pouring rain here in Jacksonville. And the good thing about being in a window tint shop is that when it rains, you can put motorcycles inside and the cars inside. It's awesome. So here we are. It took a few more minutes to actually get everybody in and dry. So it's pretty cool. We are so glad that you're here with us. If you're here in person, awesome. If you're tuning in online, great. The volume was turned up a little bit because we got rain and it is a steel building, so we kind of talk over it. So y'all bear with us on that. Hopefully it'll settle down here in a little bit. But it's raining pretty bad. So we're here every Sunday. We start gathering about 5 o'clock because we like to eat. So we have snacks and drinks. So we have food. We start there, and then we typically get started at 5:30 with worship. But like I said, we're a little late today. So, having said that, you have a chance to join us next week. We're here at 2080 St. John's Bluff Road South at Wyndham at 10 Specials. And we would love to have you come and join us and hang out with us. Now tonight, we're going to be a little abbreviated. No music tonight, it's just going to be the message. So let me jump right into it. Let me ask you a question tonight. Have you ever felt like you were being singled out for something? Just you, being singled out for something. Ever felt like you were being persecuted? Maybe you felt like the boss had it in for you at work. You just couldn't get along no matter what. And you always felt like he was picking on you, looking for little things that you were doing wrong. You know, sometimes in that kind of a situation, we can bring that on ourselves. We really can. We don't want to admit it, but we can bring it on ourselves. You know, sometimes we're just not doing the job that we should be doing. We're not doing as good a job as we should be doing. Or maybe we're just not doing the job we're supposed to be doing. You know, or sometimes it's not that at all. Sometimes it's just that we would never admit it, but we're obnoxious and we're overbearing and nobody wants to be around us. That happens. Or sometimes it's just because you're a follower of Jesus Christ. And because you're a follower of Jesus, you stand out in the crowd. I mean, you take a stand for what you believe in. You don't mind letting people know it. Hopefully, and not in an obnoxious way. But you take a stand. You won't give in to the pressure around you. Sometimes it's because we don't want to go with the flow. You know, sometimes that group of guys and girls from work, they're going out after work and, you know, they're probably going to have a few drinks, and maybe that's just not something that we're into. Maybe it's something we don't want to do. So we don't go. Maybe it's because we want to take a stand against the devil's drink. So we don't go out with the group after work. Or maybe the group after work, they're going someplace where, you know, we don't want to go. Maybe it's some organization or some place that supports a lifestyle that we don't believe in. So we don't go. We make pleasant excuses why we don't go, but we don't go. So those kind of things make us stand out in a crowd. For whatever reason, we just don't blend in sometimes. You know, we don't go to those kind of places that support things that we don't believe in because we don't want to spend our money or our time there. This is how it is. And I'm not saying that if you're a follower of Jesus, you should stop drinking. If that's something you want to do. I'm not saying you should do that necessarily. But if you feel it can lead somebody else, if you feel it can lead somebody else into a position that will cause them to stumble, then you probably should. I mean, you really wouldn't want to go drinking in front of a recovering alcoholic. That would be just rude. Those are the kinds of things that you just don't want to do. We want to refrain from those kind of things, those kind of places. Because we feel that it doesn't honor God. It's not where we need to be. we still need to share the gospel, the good news of Jesus, with those coworkers that are going out for that drink or to that place that we don't necessarily want to go. We can't offend them to the point that we can't share our love of Christ with them. No matter how vocal we want to be or how quiet we want to be about following Jesus, the fact that we live differently will always, at some point, become noticeable. It will become an inconvenient truth for the world around us. Just this week, in the news, I was reading about a VA medical center in West Virginia. And this medical center was the Lewis Johnson VA Medical Center. And a veteran went in, and they have, I guess, in that medical center, a receiving area where you go in and you talk to somebody about why you're there and what you need, and he qualifies you and decides where you're going to go. And in his office, he had hanging on the wall a cross. And apparently, the patient at the VA decided that that cross was enough to cause him trauma. It traumatized him. And he complained to the authorities, to the leadership at the Lewis Johnson VA Medical Center. And here's how they replied, how they responded. The executive director of the center wrote this letter. He wrote, "The Latin cross has been removed, and the employee has been counseled on the display of personal faith symbols. And the executive leadership team is in the process of re-emphasizing the importance of maintaining a professional atmosphere to all employees at the Lewis A. Johnson VA Medical Center." He went on to say, "To the veteran patient who experienced the feelings of trauma caused by the Latin cross, we sincerely apologize. In addition, we are grateful for you bringing it to our attention so that we were able to remedy in this instance and ensure that the future veteran patients find our hospital to be a safe and welcoming environment, regardless of faith or lack thereof." He was traumatized by a cross. So they removed it because he complained, one person. In John 15, we see this. We see Jesus speaking, and he says, "If the world hates you, know that it hated me before it hated you." Jesus is letting us know. He's letting us know that the world's not going to be happy with the life that we lead and the truth that we speak. He knew 2,000 years ago what the world was going to become. And he knew that we would need encouragement. For here's the thing. In the early days of the church, in the first century, being a Christian was not for wimps. Being a Christian was not for wimps at the beginning of the church. The Jewish leadership would send out people like Saul, who later became Paul, to track down and kill these new and dangerous Christians. Later, the Romans sought out and killed these dangerous Christians. And why? Why are you maybe asking? I was certainly, I said, why did they kill these early Christians? Well, for one, Rome worshipped many different gods. And each of those gods required blood sacrifices. Jesus does not require a sacrifice, but provided himself to be a sacrifice for all of us. Now, this caused much misunderstanding, much change, and much mistrust among those who didn't understand this Jesus thing and sacrificed for us. We don't do that. And the early Christians, they refused to worship more than one God. They refused to join in with these people from after work. They refused to go in and worship multiple gods. Because of these things, the early Christians were considered social outcasts, or people who didn't fit into what the world wanted. Does that kind of sound familiar? As time went by, things didn't change very much at all. We see in different stages of history, we see Christians being killed for their beliefs, persecuted. In the 20th century, as the 20th century commenced, we see in Armenia, we see a massacre of Armenian Christians beginning on April 24th, 1915, and continuing in the years after World War I. The Turkish Muslim government decided that the Christian race was a danger to their national unity. In order to settle what they called the Armenian question, they systematically killed 1.5 million Christian Armenians. When the atheist communists took control of Russia in 1917, they spent the next 7 decades deliberately suppressing, exiling, and killing an estimated 20 million Christians, 17 million Russian Orthodox, and 3 million Roman Catholic. In Spain, in the 1930s, in Spain, 13 bishops, 4,172 priests, 2,364 monks, 283 nuns were killed by atheist leftists during the Spanish Civil War. Synagogues, Protestant churches, Catholic churches were burned, pillaged, closed. 150,000 to 400,000 people who were opposed to Franco were killed, so many that we don't have an accurate number. Protestants were persecuted and many were forced to leave the country. All non-Catholic Bibles were prohibited and were confiscated by the police. We say that was all in other countries in the early parts of the 20th century. What about now? What about the 21st century? What about here? What about North America? What about in the United States? It's the last bastion of freedom, after all. Surely, here we are granted the right to practice Christianity without interference, without restriction. After all, the First Amendment provides that the Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting its free exercise. It protects the freedom of speech, the press, assembly, the right to petition the government for redress of grievances. Sadly, we're starting to see the powers that be begin to fail to protect these rights for your average Christian folks. And it's plain to anyone who's paying attention. You know, Jesus used a phrase. He used, "Let those with ears hear." And then if you're paying attention, if your heart's right, you'll know what I'm saying. Let those with ears hear. Let those with eyes see what's going on around us. People from different walks of life have been warning us for some time now. Famous people, people who aren't famous, crackpots on the street. Johnny Cash, one of the bad boys of early country music, arrested for drugs, genuine bad boy. He said this. He said, "Being a Christian isn't for sissies. It takes a real man to live for God. A lot more man than it does to live for the devil." Alice Cooper, American rock star, sex, drugs, and rock and roll. Seriously addicted to cocaine in his earlier years. He says this: "Drinking beer is easy. Trashing your hotel room is easy. But being a Christian
That's a tough call. That's rebellion. It's Alice Cooper. And he's right. That's real rebellion. Jesus started that rebellion when he walked on earth more than 2,000 years ago. He stood up and he said that the way the temple was being run, he said that's wrong. The legalistic ways that the Jews were applying the law, that was wrong. The multi-theistic beliefs of the Romans, he said, that's wrong. All these things he said were wrong. He said the way to get to heaven was him. That he was the way to heaven. The audacity. He said he was, matter of fact, he said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father but through me. What he said was a threat. It was a threat to the leadership at the temple. It was a threat to the leadership at the synagogue. It was a threat to the Roman leadership because it was different. It was a change. It was a sacrifice that didn't require anything on our part. And they didn't understand it, so it was a threat. Now, a few years ago, there was a young woman named Casey. And she was like a lot of young people today. She was about the age of 15, and she started drinking alcohol, using drugs, hanging out with some rough people at school, people her parents didn't really appreciate, but they were trying to be understanding. So one day her parents found a stack of letters that she'd been writing back and forth with one of her friends. And in those letters, they talked about killing their parents and killing their teachers. Well, as good parents they were, they took her and enrolled her in a Christian school and made her, mind you, go to church. After some time at the school and the church, Casey decided that alcohol and drugs just weren't her thing anymore, because she found somebody that she knew would take care of that for her. She found the person of Jesus Christ. And because of that, she didn't use drugs or drink alcohol anymore. Now, sometime later, she ended up transferring high schools. And she lived in Colorado. And she went to the public high school. That public high school was called Columbine High School. And due to her love for Jesus, she found out that she stood out among her peers. She didn't exactly fit in. She had lots of friends, but she didn't go places with them because they went places that she didn't want to go, because she didn't think that it honored Jesus. During that fateful day in Columbine in April 1999, 2 shooters entered that school and started shooting people at random, shooting their classmates. And they came to Casey. Realizing who she was, one of them asked her, "You believe in God?" And as soon as she said yes, he shot her and killed her. Because she stood out and was different. In that same school, that same day, there was another young lady. Her name was Rachel. Now, Rachel knew these young men. In fact, one of these young men that was shooting people had actually played the piano for her at a talent show earlier in the year. And when the microphones went out, he actually rushed to repair the microphone so that she could finish her song. He looked at Rachel and asked her, "Do you believe in God?" She looked him square in the eye and said, "You know I do." And he shot and killed her. These girls were singled out because they were different. They stood out. They stood out from their peers. They were a threat to the things that these killers believed in, the chaos and anarchy that they felt should rule. But they were a threat to that. Where all the other killings were random, with these 2 girls, they stopped. and deliberately chose to kill him. Now, these are some extreme examples, granted. I mean, this rarely happens in the United States. It happens in other places, right? It happens in other countries where there's lots of persecution and it's expected, and the Christians there, they're used to it. But what is happening around us? What is happening here in the United States? What are we seeing? Well, first, let's look at this. Let's look at 2 Timothy chapter 3. It says this, it says, you must understand this. In the last days, there will be violent periods of time. People will be selfish and love money. They will brag, be arrogant, and use abusive language. They will curse their parents, show no gratitude, have no respect for what is holy, and lack normal affection for their families. They will refuse to make peace with anyone. They will be slanderous, lack self-control, be brutal, have no love for what is good. They will be traitors. They will be reckless and conceited. They will love pleasure rather than God. They will appear to have a godly life, but they will not let its power change them. Stay away from such people. We have mass shootings in our country that boil down to no more than people with no real regard for human life. That's verse 1. We have people that will be like, my coffee is too hot and I spilled it on myself, let me sue. You don't support my beliefs? Let me yell. We even have politicians who stand on the floor of the Congress and cuss at each other over differences of opinion. That's verse 2. We could go on and on. And the more we go through it, the more we're going to find that the stuff that we are becoming to the point that we just ignore, it's right here in these verses. It's right here. And it goes on. It's not just here in our little part of North America. In Canada, earlier this year, the authorities arrested a pastor for non-compliance with COVID restrictions because he opened his church and held services. And he did so more than once. He's still waiting for his trial to come up. In the U.S. during the COVID crisis, we saw churches that were forced to close due to the risk. But casinos were allowed to stay open. In Ireland, there was a woman recently who was standing across the street from an abortion center. She was standing there quietly, not talking to anyone. The people at the abortion center called the police to check her out. And when the police showed up, they asked her, what are you doing? She said, I'm praying silently for the women that are going into that clinic, that they would experience the love of Jesus and change their mind. She was arrested for protesting too near to an abortion center. She still waits for her trial. It's all around us. Christian businesses are being forced to provide goods and services in regard to things that they don't believe in because it's considered intolerant to them. A high school football coach a couple of years ago was fired because he prayed with his team after a game. And he did it more than once, and he was warned, so they fired him. The United States Supreme Court heard his case and ruled in his favor and ordered that his job be reinstated. In reaction to that, members of our government stood on the floors in the halls of our government and called for remodeling of the Supreme Court. Change the way they make their decisions because we don't agree with it. They've ruled in favor of those Christian people, and they're not what we want. It seems indeed that this is the new way to do business in America. It seems indeed that this is how things are done. Scream it till you get your way. Even if it goes against the law, or if it goes against the majority. He who yells louder gets what they want. I'm offended, I'm traumatized by a cross on a wall. So an entire set of policies has to be rewritten. If the people around you don't get in the wagon with you, you just harass them until they do. When Jesus was on trial in front of Pilate, Pilate could find absolutely no reason to condemn him. He said, I find no fault in this man. Pilate wanted to release him. He wanted to release Jesus, but the crowd shouted him down. In Matthew 27, it says this, it says, but the chief priests and the leaders persuaded the crowd to ask for the release of Barabbas and the execution of Jesus. The governor asked them, which of the two do you want me to free for you? And they said, Barabbas. Pilate asked them, then what should I do with Jesus, who is called Christ? He should be crucified, he yelled. Pilate asked, why? What's he done wrong? But they began to shout loudly, he should be crucified. Pilate saw that it was getting nowhere. Instead, a riot was breaking out. So Pilate took some water, washed his hands in front of the crowd, and said, I won't be guilty of this man's death. Do what you want. Jesus said, if they hate you, they hated me first. Jesus started a revolution all those years ago. He was a threat to those who were in power at the time, and he's still a threat to those who are in power today. All those persecutions that we see in other countries, all those things that happen in other places that don't happen here, guess what? They didn't start overnight. They didn't start overnight. They started with small steps, and they built into what they are today. Make no mistake, the time is coming when Jesus will return for us. He will come for his people and take them home. But before that happens, things are going to get worse. They're going to get much worse. Being a Christian isn't for sissies. It takes a real man to live for God. A lot more man than to live for the devil. Are you ready for what's coming? Are you ready? Are you rooted in the Word of God? Matthew 7, it says this, it says, therefore, everyone who hears what I say and obeys it will be like a wise person who built his house on a rock. Rain poured down, and floods came. Winds blew and beat against that house, but it did not collapse because the foundation was on rock. What kind of foundation do you have? Because if you don't build your foundation on rock, you've built it on sand, you've built it on clay. We saw this last year. Houses built on the Yellowstone River that weren't close to the river when they were built. But last year, during the storms and the thunder and the rain and the floods out there, the banks eroded and those houses fell into the river and washed away. Here in Jacksonville, these houses on A1A, they weren't built on the ocean when they were built. But erosion has caused them to be in danger of being washed away. Is your foundation on the rock? Or is it on sand that's not going to hold up? Right now, are you the Christian? Are you the Christian that'll look at that assassin and go, yes, I believe in Jesus? Are you the one that'll look at the assassin and say, you know, I believe in him? I hope all of us are ready to face that day. I hope it doesn't come in our lifetime. But if it does, Are we ready? I hope all of us, when it's all said and done, can hear our Lord look at us, hear our Lord say to us as he looks into our eyes and say, well done, my good and faithful servant. Enter into your reward. The reward is there for all of us who live for him, who trust him, and who love him. No matter what happens here. Lord, I just thank you for this time. I thank you for this day. Lord, I thank you for the rain that we had to yell over today. Lord, I thank you for everything that you do for us. And Lord, when the time comes, give us courage, give us strength. And until that time comes, Lord, make sure that we stand out in the crowd. Make sure that we're living for you. Make sure that the people around us go, yeah, that's one of those Christian guys. Because we want to serve you. And we want to do your will here. We want to spread your love. Lord, go with us as we go out. Keep us safe. Bring us back next week. In your name, amen.